Like many folks in Asheville, I am a transplant. In fact, I've been transplanted twice, first from Maine to Chicago, and then from Chicago to here. And even within those places, I've moved around a lot. I went to boarding school, and then I lived in the dorms in college. And during my 13 years in Chicago, I had 8 different addresses. So I've never really put down roots in any one place. And when it comes to being deeply rooted by being connected to family, well, besides my mom, I don't really have any relatives that I'm close to. And I have chosen family, my dear heart friends, but they're all really mobile too. So we stay connected, but they're spread out all over the place. So all the things we tend to associate with roots, this idea of being deeply rooted in a place, the image of a beautiful shade tree with a giant canopy and roots that spread out broadly and deeply, it's just never been my metaphor. But here's the thing. There are lots of different types of root systems in the natural world. If you're like me and the shade tree isn't your thing, then maybe you're an air plant. Air plants gather all the water and nutrients they need through their skin and just use their roots to gently cling onto whatever's available. And if a strong wind knocks them out of their nook, they just take up residence somewhere else. Or if that metaphor doesn't work for you, perhaps you're giant kelp. Giant kelp can grow to be 100 or 150 feet long. It can grow as much as 2 feet in a single day. It grows from the ocean floor all the way to the surface, creating these luscious kelp forests that shelter and support all these other ocean creatures. Giant kelp does all these amazing things, yet all it has to anchor itself to the earth is this little cluster of root-like structures called a holdfast. I mean, a holdfast. Come on, how's that for a metaphor? So earlier this month, I spent a week at the John C. Campbell Folk School, a really, truly special place. I took a beginning watercolor painting class, a medium that I have always admired, but always been deeply intimidated by. In order to make this adventure happen for myself financially, I needed to go for the cheapest housing option. So that, my friends, is how I ended up spending a week in a surprisingly small dorm room with 5 very lovely but very chatty humans. And if you've been to the folk school, you'll know that all meals are done family style. So breakfast, lunch, and dinner, more chatting. It's great. Oh, and it rained the entire week. So all of my normal escape valves, going for long, solitary walks, taking my coffee outside in the morning to journal by myself, none of these tools were available to me. So here I was, learning a new medium, working really hard in the studio, pushing myself creatively, trying to be vulnerable. But once I left the studio, I didn't have any place of refuge. That week at the folk school, I was a succulent. I broke off a tiny piece of myself and I sent it out into the world. But in order to do that, I needed to protect myself. I had to let all of my tender and exposed bits callous over and harden. Then, once I found a good place to land, I let a teeny tiny version of myself begin to emerge. I left it alone. I didn't poke at it or fuss with it. I just let it do its thing. I kept painting, and it kept growing. There was a moment late in the week. I'd spent all day working on one painting, bent over with my face about 10 inches from the paper. I kept layering wash after wash of translucent color and only really seeing 1 square inch of the paper at a time. At break time, I stood up, and you know that feeling when you emerge from deep concentration and the world comes rushing back to you? That happened, and I stepped back and I finally saw my entire painting from a distance for the first time, and I burst into tears. I was literally amazed at what I had created. Y'all, I have been an artist my entire life, and I thought I had a good sense of who I am as an artist. But this painting and this new medium, I had never created anything like it. First of all, it was a landscape. That's not my thing. It was also super realistic, also not my thing. But it also had this luminosity. It seemed to glow from within. It was magic. I thought a lot about whether to include a slide of this painting during my talk. Creative Mornings talks often include images, and I'm very proud of that painting, but I realized that specific painting isn't the point. That painting is a milestone along my journey from who I thought I was as an artist on the way to the artist that I could become. It was completely new, but also completely me. Just like a succulent, I had propagated something new out of myself, a version of me that was the same, but different, new, but just a little bit better, fully formed, and ready to send out some new roots. So what I hope you will take from this talk is that you'll remember that there's no one way to exist in this world. No matter what kind of root system or root structure you have, if those roots nourish you, if those roots sustain you, and if those roots connect you to your place in this world, then you are doing it right. Because all roots are good roots. Thank you.
The most essential skill that you could possibly learn at this point in human history is to navigate the unknown with mastery. When we don't do this well, we lose our connection. We lose our ability to think clearly and creatively in the moment. We become victims of circumstance and our patterns. We fall prey to old beliefs and generational patterns and strategies that were formed long ago. And we lose our ability to be present. And when we learn how to navigate the unknown with mastery, we plant ourselves deeply in the gifts of living. And we resonate more easily with the flow of life and the blessings of love and grace. So we live in a very unique point in human history. We've only known for the last 100 years that reality is fundamentally comprised of energy and matter that's trading places back and forth, unpredictably. So the future is fundamentally unpredictable. And biochemistry tells us that the thing that makes you unique is literally the way you see the world. And so the questions become, how do we navigate? How do we adapt so that we can operate well and function and get our needs met when we know that each thing we know always leads to a whole bunch of other things we don't? And how can we share our gifts and benefit from each other's unique gifts and offerings so that we can make the difference that we most want to make? And what's sound got to do with it? Well, when the terrain gets this weird, it's helpful to have a compass that can bring us back to three fundamental questions. 1, what is happening? 2, who am I? And 3, what do I do now? And so I have fleshed this out into what I call the Holy Trinity of improv. And it's part of a larger process that I've created using music improvisation to help people to connect with their creative genius and their innate musicality so that they can ground in their own true nature and express themselves with authenticity in any given moment. Which I don't know what I was going to say next. So what's authentic right now? So as we connect to these energies that are running through us and listen to them and learn to express ourselves through sound, we connect underneath our narrative monkey minds, and we connect more deeply with who we are and with each other through direct experience. So within that, I believe, lies the seeds of new possibility. As Hans Jenny puts it, the more we consider these things and the more we study these things, we realize that sound is the creative principle, that it must be considered primordial, that no other phenomenon or form is capable of originating things, but that power of creativity does lie within tone and sound. So the first step in the Holy Trinity is to listen carefully, and it's first and vital to continue to come back to that over and over, more and more deeply. Listen to the nature of the sound itself, beyond your labeling, as if you'd never heard this thing before, as if you didn't really know where the sound comes from, which you don't. The second step is to feel deeply What's going on in your body right now? What's the experience you're having right now? Is there any message in that feeling for you? What's the most true, deep experience that you're having right now? Who am I? And the third step is to play it out. Play the sound that expresses this feeling or experience that you're having. Or maybe it's just the sound that you're wanting to hear most. Or it's the sound that you're wanting to put out there. It's a decision. What do I do now? And as the sound goes out, it moves things. So listen again. Listen to the call of bird, bear, bee, wolf, river, refugee, all of our relations. Feel so deeply that you become your yearning. Play your song out so that you can hear yourself matter. Why dig so deeply into the roots of reality? You see, I believe that you are capable of much more than you think. And that when you listen carefully and attentively to your own sound, you dig deeply into a well that can bring you many beautiful, wonderful surprises into your life. So as you know, we are facing many deep and profound challenges in this world. And oftentimes we feel powerless to even consider them. But what if we move beyond our narrow securities of pride and dependence and control and stepped into our birthright as blessed beings of a divine creation? And what if the thing that the world needs the most is literally vibrating within your very cells, detectable only to you to interpret and express? And what if we were able to allow our precious yearnings to burn through old beliefs that are holding us back, and we accessed and unleashed that most soulful potential that is buzzing us and calling us to notice and listen and step up? What would be possible then? I would love to find out. How about you? Thank you.
Man, a few disclaimers. I'm an emotive dude. I might scream. And everybody in this story is doing their best. And in honor of Jules, my new awesome friend, I'm self-identifying this morning as a quaking aspen. One of the largest root systems on the planet, and it's because I cannot do it alone. So if you leave with one thing today, leave knowing that I believe you're divine. That word is messed up, man. It got hooked up with some deities. It got hooked up with some churches. But that's not the image I want. I want the image of you as a small child coming into this world in a place of perfection. I want an image of you to be able to travel back to that place any moment you need to. And the reason why I'm telling you that is because I lived in defiance of all of that for about 47 years. And I lived disconnected to every one of you all. And disconnected to my divinity. That was a little fast. This is my story. Prom 1964. They were born in the same hospital about 6 months apart. I can't tell you the rest of it. But the two things I can tell you is that he was in a high chair. His mother died in an adjacent room. He still can't speak of it. And he, for some reason, recently converted to Catholicism. Her name is Janice. She was born to an only child to her mother. And they lived mostly in the shadows of her mother's mental illness that was never diagnosed. And I'm the third generation of that trauma, and it ends with me. But the story goes like this, or at least I make it up, and it feels like this to me when I need to find meaning, is that it was on an exact car like that, and a rumble seat in the back of the car, not in the car. Maybe it was on top of the back of the car. I don't know. It was a hot May day, and it was in the Ohio Valley, and I'm sure it was sticky in May. Doing their best, Sonny and Jan. In that moment, I became living proof that the withdrawal method doesn't work. So what I really like to imagine actually is when they were in the throes of teenage lust, looking eye to eye, they actually saw each other's divinity. They actually saw a new way of love. They actually saw a new beginning. They actually felt hope. And you know, when I want to get really wild, I like to think they saw me. But the things that came up in this talk as a script, 3 words, is that they chose me. If I had had some way back to those 3 words, that those 2 kids, 17, my mom turned 18 5 days before I was born on February 1, 1965. It's no accident that she also turned 73 last Sunday, and she can't even form a sentence because of childhood trauma. And it's no accident I stand here today, turning 55 tomorrow and knowing what I know. So that last slide that went by us somehow is really to mark that I showed up throughout my life as the weather, extreme weather patterns, because that was my roots. I left chaos. But I'm here to tell you today there's hope. And I'm trying to get it to go forward now. But for me, my roots had to be totally grafted. They had to be cut off, stuck back on, someplace else in the root system. It had to be an abrupt end. Because my first divorce didn't do it. 2 neck surgeries when I couldn't use my arm to make things for a year didn't do it. And cancer taken out on my 40th birthday in the hospital on my birthday somehow didn't do it. But the thing I give you with the deepest sadness and trying not to touch it right now and hold this edge is the thing that didn't do it was touching my children as they passed into this world. It had to be a big deal. These guys are the language of love. So are you. Each place you know yourself as the perfect being you were when you came onto this earth. That's the language of love. And the hope I share with you is that I finally got it when they were 10 and 12. It was April 12th, 2013, and I left my house with nothing to live for. And that's the story of a longer talk if you'll invite me back. As I went on a bike ride that I'd been on over 100 times, I didn't know if I'd ever come back. I approached a curve going 40 miles an hour. And I heard outside of the left side of my body, very gently, "Today's the day. You should slow down." And I screamed back in defiance. I said, "Fuck you, I got this!" So what that was me. That was my divinity. It wasn't outside of me. So as I went further into the curve, I saw 3 vehicles, all white, all driven by men. I calculated hitting the front one. I calculated going underneath the front one, in between the second and the first, or underneath all of them. I left my bike flying through the air and got close enough to the windshield. I could see the man. I looked him right in the eye. And I hit the ground in the blackness of my abrupt grafting. So my son Maxwell's here, 16 in the back. So this is to bring us all to a close because Stephanie said you're out of time. Is that by me knowing this about my roots, I got a little further knowledge recently when I was in my car driving with my older son to go on a hike. And I went a certain way for a certain reason. I went opposite into that curve as we were going up the mountain. And he looked at me and he said, I know it was a really hard day for you, Dad. He said, but I want you to know that every one of my problems were shattered with your right arm. That's divine knowing. That's you. You have it. And all I have to leave you with today is, what are you doing to sit in support of it? What space are you holding for others to find it? May we all have that.